The beauty of what's happened in this new generative AI revolution is it caused us all to dream. What we're forgetting is that we actually have a bunch of skills. We actually have a bunch of techniques from the past. We can backport those dreams to those skills and still make it work.
Welcome to Ground Truth, an open conversation on the technology reshaping our world. In AI, ground truth is the real world data. You check a model against the actual answer, not the model's guess. In community health, the ground truth is what's happening at the doorstep in a household with a health worker providing care. So that's the spirit of the series, honest conversations about what's really driving our work, technology, AI, funding, ownership, who holds the power measured against that reality. I'm Andra, Co-Executive Director at Medic, and I'm here today with Raffi Krikorian. Raffi is the CTO of Mozilla, and he's also been the chair of Medic's board since 2023. Welcome, Raffi, and thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Maybe before we start, quick bit of context for anyone new to our world. Medic stewards the Community Health Toolkit, or the CHT, which is a collection of open source tools powering digital health systems. And together with a community of practice, we support more than 180,000 community health workers across 24 countries. So the question we're opening this series with is this. What does AI for community health actually look like when you're a small open source organization supporting the last mile of care? And 15 years of building alongside these health workers is the lens that I will try to bring to this conversation. But Rafi, let me start with the line that runs through everything you write: owners, not renters. And before we get into any of the technology, can you explain what you mean by that and how that idea relates to a community health worker walking between homes in rural Kenya? And why does owners, not renters, matter for the people Medic and the CHT community serve and for the world itself? And is there a part of it that still doesn't sit easily with you when you look at our world?
Owners, not renters was originally a theme I was using to try to describe the way technology has evolved over the last, let's call it, decade or 2 decades, where we've increasingly created large platforms that are running our technological lives. So Google indexes the web for us. They're a large platform. The social media revolution is another example of it, where their communication mechanism was a large platform. And where you're seeing this right now with artificial intelligence and the way AI is being deployed, that these are coming from companies running these large platforms. And the thing I was trying to highlight for people was this notion that these technological platforms, while world changing, while probably well meaning, are being designed with the incentives to make us renters, not owners. So let's take social media, because that's a very concrete example that I think everyone can resonate with. You publish content to Twitter or now X or to any of the other social media networks. And while it is legally in the case of the United States, in the case of some of the platforms, your work, when we were at Twitter, we worked hard to make sure that the content of your tweet was actually your work. The platforms have been slowly changing over the times, where X now trains all their AI algorithms off of all the content that's going through their network. So like data is being extracted from you, and you are becoming the product of this system, not the recipient of these systems. And so we're seeing this again in artificial intelligence, where, Andra, if you use any of the chatbots, like they're what they call sycopanthic. They tell you you're wonderful as a way to keep you engaged with them because they need you to stay engaged. That's the business model of the system. So let me flip that around. The world that I want to live in is one that we're owners, not the renters of the system. So that means that if I have an artificial intelligence, I know it's actually on my side. So this is one of the things we think a lot about at Mozilla, because when Firefox came into the world, it was created as a way to be a credible alternative to the ecosystems that Microsoft wanted to create. And so we wanted to make a user agent, the web browser, that was definitively on the side of the user. And it still does it today, right? You can run ad blockers, you can disable cookies, you can disable all the tracking mechanisms that the web is slowly put into place. And you know that browser is on your side. So I'm trying to find that same metaphor when it comes to AI, where I don't want, if we look at it from an American context, all these big companies are chasing what they call AGI, artificial general intelligence. I don't want a world where there's only 7 AGIs out there, which are actually on the side of the platform. They want to figure out ways for the platforms to make money. They want to figure out ways for the platforms to get data. I want 7 billion AGIs where every one of them is on the side of the person who actually runs it. It is the best thing for me. So I can tell it my health data. I can tell it my private psychological information. I can tell it all this stuff, and I know it's not going anywhere, and it's only going to use it to make good decisions on my behalf. So I think about this a lot when it comes to global health, especially the kind of work that we do at Medic with community health workers, that like a community health worker's goal is to deliver care, to deliver love, to deliver humanity to people who need it the most on the ground, the people in the villages, the people in the undeveloped areas, the people in the slums, the people in all these places. And like in that world, you need to know that community health worker is on your side, not on someone else's side. And therefore, by extension, we need to know the tools that they're using is on the side of that community health worker. So he or she can be on your side as well. So that tension and how that plays out is something I'm like both really worried about, but also really optimistic about that we can actually make that work. But it's going to take time, it's going to take energy, but I think we can make that balance work.
So I love that you just shared the example of a community health worker. I want to build on that and maybe make it a bit more concrete with our work here at Medic. That last mile of care that you mentioned is Medic and CH's community's entire world. And Victor Grace, community health workers, you mentioned in rural Kenya or even in urban areas that are underserved on a 6-year-old Android phone, sometimes no signal for days. And you talked about AGI and powerful models. Most frontier AI quietly assumes a fast, always on connection to a data center far away. And most of the time, that's exactly what Grace doesn't have. It's why the CHT was built offline first from the start. The tool has to work when the connection doesn't. Raffi, you've been tracking models that have left the data center. You build a translator small enough to fit on a USB stick. They'd be models many times size. And you're working with full strength models running on a laptop or battery with nothing plugged in. But let me ground it for Grace, like 6 years old phone, no signal. Can an offline model on that hardware do something genuinely useful for her today? Say, reorder her visits by who's nearest and most at risk based on where she's standing. And for us at Panic, that's not hypothetical. Like smarter transportation is something that we're actually co-designing with health workers in the field at the moment. How far out is that?
It is possible today, but we just have to think about it differently. I think the problem that we're having right now is we're trying to do a one size fits all when it comes to AI. If we talked about AI pre 2024, 2023, we wouldn't even be talking about large language models, but we would be talking about how would we build a system that statistically reorders the tasks based on where a person is or based on past history? We know how to do a bunch of these different techniques that we've all been chasing. And I think that you can still build a system that, if you take your example, Andra, of given Grace's location, given historically the kinds of people that she's spoken to, let's reorder her day. I absolutely think we can build something like that. Now, who else can build something like that is something like Claude, but you can't fit Claude on a phone. But I'll also say that you don't need Claude in order to do something like that. I think that we can still create small model. And by small model, it could even literally be a set of heuristics that you do, or just a very simple sense of linear regression in order to make someone's day work, or statistical analysis to see what a histogram of today looked like versus yesterday. And let's reorder to get the histograms to match up. I think we can do a lot of this work today, but I think the beauty of what's happened in this new generative AI revolution is it caused us all to dream. We can now think about all these different things because it's become normal that are just like, I saw Claude do the following. But I think what we're forgetting is that we actually have a bunch of skills. We actually have a bunch of techniques from the past we can backport those dreams to those skills and still make it work. So can a 6-year-old Android phone run an LLM that can do sophisticated planning so that you could reorder Grace's day? Probably not. Can a 6-year-old Android phone run a set of more primitive AI techniques or machine learning techniques or data science techniques to reorder Grace's day based on a bunch of features or heuristics? Absolutely. And I think we need to close the gap of the things we remembered how to do for these constrained worlds, for these offline worlds, and the ability for us to dream in this generative world. We just need to connect those dots a bit.
Yeah, this helped reframe it for me. But there's a harder question that we've been sitting on, like, because to your point, to run on Grace's phone, a model has to be shrunk down, or we need a smaller that does a specific task. And that might be maybe less accurate than the big one in the cloud. And you mentioned cloud. Who gets to decide what good enough means here
Yep.
to ensure that the size of the model and what it does is at the same level of quality of what a bigger model could do? Who should be in the room when that line gets drawn?
No, this is a great question. And I'm actually curious to know what you think. You're more of a practitioner on the ground than I am. But what I would say is that we've all seemed to underestimate our ability to do evaluations. So if you think about the way new models are released today, everyone runs them against some benchmark somewhere. And then we use that some benchmark to decide that this model is more powerful than something else. But the problem is that capability is like a jagged frontier. It's not like you are good at this one benchmark, so therefore you're good at everything. It's just like a human being. If I'm good at, like, I think I'm a pretty decent coder, maybe not one of the best, but me being a decent coder translates nothing to my ability to do healthcare diagnosis. And so the same thing applies to like a bunch of these like techniques, is that just because you're good at one thing doesn't mean you're good at another. So we need to figure out how to do community evaluations. We need to figure out how to do personal evaluations to like better understand. And so like when I talk to organizations about being AI ready these days, part of it means like having the skill set to evaluate whether or not someone's AI product, someone's AI model, some open source model you've downloaded is actually good for you. So setting up like, this is a representative use case. This is what good looks like. This is what bad looks like. And figuring out how to do that so that you can then evaluate quickly when something new shows up of, oh, this is better than the last thing, or no, we shouldn't touch. It doesn't matter what these guys are saying. We shouldn't touch it at all. So now the question becomes, who creates those benchmarks? And I think the beauty of someone like Medic is that you're actually on the ground. You're both computer people, software engineers, nerds, and you're subject matter experts and community members. And so I think you need that trifecta or bifecta of being a nerd and being a community member to actually do those evaluations. I would love to live in a world where CHTs are making up a panel of people who are creating the evaluations that we should be using as part of our decision of this is good enough. You and I can come in and be like, well, this can actually fit on a phone. And then they can actually help us define what good looks like, what bad looks like, what the gray zone looks like. So I think I want to live in a world where you push evaluation as close to the edge as you possibly can. And that's going to require a little bit of education, a little bit of scaffolding, a little bit of tooling. But I think we can do that. I think that's a completely possible thing. So like that, I want to live in that world.
Definitely, evaluation is something that we are keeping in mind right now as we are looking into evaluating existing small models for local languages. Where we support a number of languages in Africa and Asia in the different geographies that use where the CHT is used, but there are thousands of languages in Africa, just to start with. And a lot of community health workers are not fluent in English or other colonial languages or official languages in the different geographies. And actually, we're starting looking into how can we evaluate what's out there, because there's amazing work and research done for local language models.
Local languages is a really great example of what I was talking about. Something like a Claude probably doesn't speak the thousands of local languages I do, but Claude can do physics. And I'm just like, but I don't care about physics. I care about the local languages. Like, so that's like a really great example of just, we need to have things that are actually tuned for our use case. And like relying on these really big things means that they're usually tuned for the use cases of the people who are building them. That's why these companies are looking for more and more people to partner with to help them gather more data on how they should tune their systems. Or people like you and I can be creating the locally owned, locally tuned version that we don't need to do quantum physics, but we need to talk healthcare worker kind of thing.
Exactly. And you mentioned data. And there are 2 points that are very important also, because what we've learned in order to be able to evaluate existing smaller tool models, we need to ensure that the foundation of data is
Yeah,
built in a way that's readable and makes sense for the
totally.
models we are evaluating. So we are doing a lot of work on ensuring data labeling, creating the APIs, ensuring that we capture task interactions within the CHT so we can actually understand how the
Totally.
community health workers uses the tool. And we found out that's actually very important before we dig into anything else. You also use the framing AI ready. I think that's what we definitely see as the first step, maybe, in being AI ready.
Yeah, or organization of your local data set is probably the first thing. The second thing being, then how do we evaluate when a model runs on my data, like whether or not this is a good model or not? But like when I talk to orgs about being AI ready, a lot of it is just like preparing yourself so when the inevitable happens, that one of these tools shows up on your doorstep, you can react quickly and decide. I don't like it when organizations just blindly, they're like, well, like my friend said ChatGPT was better than using Quen or some random thing like that. And I'm like, well, but how do you know? And so that how do you know is the thing that we need to be like rapidly educating a bunch of orgs, that like it's not even like how does Andra know or how does Raffi know, but like how does the end user, the person who's a recipient of this thing, know that this is the best thing that they can get or the right thing that they can get.
Maybe going to another angle that's really close to my heart, and I think very close to Mozilla's heart. CHT is open source digital public good, and Mozilla, you build open source public goods too. And as an organization, you've spent years inside a question that we live every day. What does it actually take to keep something like this alive? And there's one that I keep circling. Does AI make open source and digital public goods more sustainable or more fragile? And you push back hard on the open source is dead argument, and you wrote that the same force is making attacks cheaper, also making audits and forks and alternative faster. But you also wrote about NHS England pulling 200 repositories private over muted. So where do you actually land?
No, we're going through a moment. Like that is clear. If we talk about Firefox for a second, like the number of contributions from the outside world has increased, but the number of those contributions which are clearly AI generated and are some form of pull request slop has also clearly increased. And so that's one trend that I've been looking at. Another trend that I'm looking at is like this notion of a SaaS apocalypse that's occurring, which is like instead of people buying a tool, they instead vibe code a tool that could do that thing for them. The problem with the SaaS apocalypse is that people are underestimating, but they'll learn soon, like the cost of maintenance, the cost of deployment complexity, the cost of like when you want a feature upgrade, like a brittle system will just break when you just like bolt on a new feature, like it hasn't been thought through. So I think that's another trend I've been looking at, which is like this combination of like SaaS apocalypse and vibe coding and how that's going to work out. And maybe a last trend I've been looking at is the cost of everything. And so, like right now, we've gone through this phase of token maxing of all these people trying to like use as many tokens as they can because they think that using tokens is a good thing. And token maxing was probably good for a bit because it helped people rapidly understand what these tools are good for, what these tools aren't good for. But I think we're entering into this world of like token ROI. Is that cost of that incremental token actually worth it for the state of my code base, the state of the system, and stuff like that? So those three things, like the SaaS apocalypse, token ROI, and there was this like flooding of pull requests, like these things are going to settle out over time. The one thing, and I'll tell you how I think they'll settle out, but the one thing which gives me hope is that even through all this, people keep on saying open source is dead because now all these people are just vibe code random shit left and right. Those people who are vibe coding stuff still want to share it. There's been an explosion of the amount of bytes that are on GitHub all of a sudden because all these people are still having that innate desire of an engineer to share what they've done. And that, I think, is what open source really is about. We just lived in a world for the last 20, 30, whatever years, where creating the actual code was the hard part. And so, like, when people created the actual code, they shared it. But now we live in a world where creating the code modulo of is it good code, does the code cost to write stuff like that, which is all settling out, is becoming easier. But there still is a desire to share. And so I think one of the things that'll actually end up settling out in the long run is what are we sharing and how are we sharing it? If we look at what the Mozilla AI team does, on one of their projects, they don't even write the code anymore. What the engineers do is they all commit to the specification, and then a computer in the background, just like every time the specification changes, it regenerates the code base. And the code base might look wildly different from noon to 1 p.m., but it does the same thing, or it does the same thing with this one addition that someone committed to the spec. Is that open source? Maybe. The spec is fully open, and the machinery behind it just happens to rewrite it every single time. So I think we'll actually get to a world where maybe we'll settle down on spec-driven development, or we'll settle down on prompt-driven development, and then we'll have mechanisms to share around that. There are missing tools to make that work. I don't think Git is the right tool for a community of people who are vibe coding together. Compilers created bytes, and then we commit bytes into Git. But now we live in a world where prompts can create code which creates bytes, and Git is at the wrong level. So we need a tool that's one level up, that's recording the prompts, or is recording the interactions that then generate the code that then generate the bytes. I think that like when someone creates the equivalent of GitHub but for prompt coding, then we'll see open source settle in again. And we just need that next level of abstraction to show up.
I love that you bring that up because this is a big tension we've had in our team. And actually, we are still having these conversations around how big of a change do I need to understand each line of code? Or should I invest my time into writing the spec and the test and be comfortable and own that part? And then I trust the agent to do the rest. And the old discipline was always like small changes, split a task into smaller PRs. Everyone can read line by line, understand it, and give feedback. But again, agents now hand a huge batch of code at once, more than anyone can cognitively check, test, pass. So what do you do also? Do you just merge it?
I mean, we are definitely in a world of a little bit of chaos. Chaos is not a bad thing. Chaos could be a good thing. Chaos is an opportunity to learn. It's like every team does something slightly different. Like Mozilla AI is on one end of the spectrum. They work on the spec and the system writes code. On the Firefox end of the spectrum, they have a rule that only a human can commit to the code base. The human could be using tools, but the human is the person doing the commit. We have both ends of the spectrum and projects in between, left or right. I think there's an equivalent here of self-driving somewhere. If every car on the road was a robot car, life would be a lot simpler because they actually all be predictable. We all understand how the system would work. It's something we used to joke about all the time when I worked on autonomous driving. If all the cars were autonomous, this would actually be not part of a problem. The problem is we're living in this mixed world of we have some humans, we have some robot drivers, and then some stuff in between, like cruise control. And there's that interaction of all the different modalities, which is causing us problems. And I think the same thing is happening on agentic coding. A code base is more than just the bytes that go into it. It's like a community contract of like, how do we interact with each other? How do we talk to each other? How do we respect each other? How do we govern each other? Like all that's encoded in this Git code base. And what we're seeing is if you're trying to take legacy code bases, and I use legacy not to mean that they're outdated, just a code base that only humans have ever touched, and try to start retrofitting automation on top of it, you're going to start to see some friction points because you're going to get, we need to have a discussion of just, do you read every single line? Do you don't read every single line? Do we care about tests? Do we not care about tests? These are not new problems. These are the ways that code bases have been governed for years. We're just not having those conversations right now because things are moving so fast. One good thing for an organization to do is just to hit pause for a second, being like, okay, we got to stop for a second. Can we all decide what the norm is? So the Firefox team did that, right? They hit pause. They're like, okay, the norm is only a human can commit, but a human can use a tool to write this. We can disagree whether we like that norm, but they had the conversation. They modified the way they govern. They've done all those things. And then this is the way they now run their code base. And so I think that the friction points are usually showing up because of mismatched expectations of how people want to interact in that code base. And that's no, again, I don't think these things are new. They're just happening so fast all of a sudden. They just got to step back, take a breath, and let's do what good open source people know how to do, which is collaborate and just talk it through for a second.
Definitely. Those conversations are happening a lot around the communities of our partners, also in other digital public goods. And I've recently seen an interesting announcement from Warp, the digital command line editor that our team is using a lot. And they went open source and they mentioned that we do that so we can increase the number of contributions and actually sustain work. So it was a really good approach of we believe that going open source and using agile development will keep us sustainable. It's interesting to see all these different angles in the industry. I'm curious where we'll land.
It's these kind of things that actually give me hope because that I think we're all similarly to exponential curves. I think humans are really bad at seeing exponential curves because we think linearly mostly. And so when you're on an exponential, like it looks linear until it's not. Humans are just really bad at predicting those type of things. And I think the same thing is what we're seeing in this community stuff when it comes to online is that we're seeing chaos and we're not seeing a clear path out, but there are small signals that are showing up. And there are small things that if we can just remind ourselves to look to the learnings of the past or remember our humanity for a second or do those things, I'm optimistic that we can actually get out of this chaos phase. Now, the question is that chaos phase and an exponential curve at the same time, like how are these things lining up? And that's the question we should all be thinking about of just like, how do we get through the chaos before the curve truly kicks in? And if we were to focus on something as a community, it's like trying to get our norms in place now so that it doesn't get even worse when the exponential hits us.
One of my team members had a really good analogy to what you mentioned on the exponential growth of like PRs of AI slop coming in our inbox. And they mentioned, hey, it was the same when we started getting emails, right? That's why we invented spam filters. And now we managed to get that influx of emails that a lot of them are like email slop. And we just need to think constructively on how do we build a spam filter.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's both a little bit of mitigation that we need to be thinking about and mitigation and adaptation, right? The world is changing. But at the same time, one of the things that we missed out when we did email is that we put the onus on the receiver, not the sender, right? If we moved the onus back in the day, if the onus moved to the sender, we could have predicted this email problem better. So I think that we have to do both. We have to think about how we're going to mitigate this world that we live in. But we are in the time right now that we can figure out how to get the incentives to align. Then maybe the mitigation won't have to be as strong. Now, the nice thing about doing both is if we miss the window to get the incentives to align, at least we're thinking about mitigation. So, but we're in this time period where I think we can try to think about both.
Maybe to get back to our community as a whole, you know, our community, you know, the people building around the CHT. So knowing who we are, is there a table this community should be at in the next 6 to 12 months? Who actually gets to decide what good health AI looks like for the places we work? Are there the ministries, the funders, the big labs, health workers doing the job? If the people closest to the work don't claim that's it this year or in the next month, who takes it instead, in your opinion?
Yeah, let's think about what the adoption curve looks like, right? The slowest people to adopt is probably a government. Not because they're bad, it's just because that's the incentive is for them to move slowly and deliberately, right? Because they have to evaluate all the things they're actually in charge. Like, so let's work backwards from that and understand what everyone's job is. The people who are the slowest are probably the government. The people who have the incentive to move the fastest are probably the technology builders. And then there are people like us who are sitting in the middle, where we have people in charge, but people that we care about, and we are technology builders. And sometimes governments pick up our technology to be their foundational technology. And so I think it's actually up to people like us and people like governments to start to put together those tables. And a few of them are starting to show up. But I actually think this is a real opportunity for people like Medic, for us and our peers, to actually show the path that we want governments to take and to put some guardrails in place so that the technology developers will actually like show us what's possible, but operate within our system, not redefine the system for the sake of redefining the system. Our job really is to bring together community health workers, community members, patients, doctors, etc., to start figuring out like, how are we AI ready? What are the things that we actually care about? And then remind ourselves that we are actually in control in some ways. We actually hold all the cards because we hold relationships, we hold people that we care about, we hold the data sets. So when these technology companies come in, we can actually dictate what we want the rules of the game to really look like. Now, we should be open. Maybe they've thought about something differently than we've thought about it. So we shouldn't immediately discount everything and say it has to fit in our model. But it is not simply like a who dictates to who, but how do we co-learn in this environment? How do we co-develop in this environment? How do we make sure this environment's not just like a parachute technology and then walk away? So I think we just need to think about that rapid adoption curve and our role being that people in the middle, us and our peers are that people in the middle, that we can actually define a lot of this. And I would encourage us all to lean into rapid learning, getting as close to the edge as possible, making these things explainable, getting buy-in. Those kind of things are our unique superpower, being community members and technologists. And so leaning there, I think that's the thing that we need to think about.
This is really insightful. And I would like to maybe end where one of your original newsletter ended. And I think it's a bit on a related angle with what you just mentioned. That old folk tale with everyone in the house could say cook and the pot would fill with porridge. And then nobody had been taught to say stop. And the porridge nearly drowned the town.
That's right.
You carve both words into the well house, so the next person reads them for free. So here's my last question for people building AI for the last mile, like the next builder who reads this off the wall. What's the one thing to carve in now?
I don't know if I have a pithy phrase for you, Andra, but let's remember what human-centered technology is actually about, right? Like human-centered technology is making systems that are complex to be understandable for users. It's not about glorifying technology. It's also not about glorifying Ludditism, right? Like it's finding that sweet spot where the complexity of the world can be simplified in an elegant way that's understandable to an end user, understandable to the recipient of that technology. I want to just remind people that's really the goal. The goal isn't to be like, well, blah, blah, blah told me that Claude or ChatGPT or Quen is the best thing ever. I need to deploy it. Who cares? You should understand what these things are capable of so that we can then dream what we're capable of. But it's not about just glorifying the technology and deploying it. It's really understanding how do we deliver understanding, care, etc. to an actual human being. That's our job. And so like we look at it through that lens, it's not a question of stop or go. It's a question of what's good enough, what can a person understand, what gives a person care, what gives a person comfort. So remembering that's really our core mission as technologists. That's our unique lens that we need to be approaching the world at. That's the thing that we need to make pithy and carve into the side of a pot. But that's the thing. That's what the goal should be. That should be the thing that guards us for when do we hit go and when do we hit stop. It's that mission.
Raffi, thank you. What a lovely human-centered way to finish the conversation. This is exactly what we wanted to start the series with. And I think the true line is this, your own optimism and humanity. None of this is inevitable. Curiosity and conversation like this are how we band it together. So we'll have a companion piece up on the blog to chat more about open source and ownership and the topics that we discussed today. And yeah, we'll tee up very soon on who's joining us next. So if you want to learn more about MEDEC, the CHD community, AI and digital health, have a look at the description of this video. And thank you.
Well, thank you, Andra.